When Andrew Jackson assumed office, he inherited a long and difficult relationship with the native inhabitants of the settlement frontier. Following the American Revolution, the federal government began to recognize American Indian tribes as independent nations and vowed to acquire land from them only through negotiated treaties. Reflecting the prejudices of the era, Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1785,
"I believe the Indian to be, in body and mind, equal to the white man."
He felt that if American Indians were made to adopt European customs, they would quickly progress from savagery to civilization. Some tribes sought to assimilate to European American culture by accepting Christianity, adopting European systems of agriculture, and embracing other Anglo customs. A Cherokee silversmith named Sequoyah developed an alphabet for the Cherokee language. The Cherokee established a written legal code and constitution, and a newspaper called the Phoenix. The Cherokee, along with the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, were deemed by the United States as among the so-called 5 civilized tribes. But civilized or not, the American Indians living east of the Mississippi River were literally pushed off the map during the Andrew Jackson era. To hasten the process of Indian removal, in 1829, Jackson asked Congress to set aside an ample district west of the Mississippi to receive American Indians willing to emigrate there from the east. His appeal led to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The law provided sweeping assurances that relocation would be voluntary and that those who chose to leave their ancestral lands would be well compensated. On Capitol Hill, opponents of the measure saw it as an illegal land grab. Henry Clay declared that the legislation would
"bring a foul and lasting stain upon the good faith, humanity, and character of the nation."
Others likened Jackson to a military chieftain and warned,
"The concentration of power in the hands of the executive leads to despotism."
Despite the legislative guarantees of the Indian Removal Act, the Jackson administration began the systematic removal of Eastern tribes through intimidation, coercion, and bribery. With few realistic alternatives, some tribes accepted the government's orders and moved west. The Choctaw made the perilous journey from Mississippi beginning in 1830. 2 years later, the Creek of Alabama, the Chickasaw of Mississippi, and the Seminole of Florida followed in their footsteps. In Florida, some Seminoles, joined by runaway slaves, retreated to the Everglades and held out against the U.S. Army for more than 10 years. On behalf of the Cherokee Nation, Chief John Ross appealed to the Supreme Court. In Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, Chief Justice John Marshall wrote the Cherokee had
"an unquestionable and heretofore unquestioned right to the land they occupy."
But President Jackson refused to discharge the court's ruling, noting,
"John Marshall has made his decision. Now, let him enforce it."
The Cherokee were ultimately consigned to the same fate as their fellow nations. During the administration of Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren, in 1838, the U.S. Army was ordered to remove to the west the remaining Cherokee Indians. About 20,000 Cherokee were forced from their homes and driven west on a forced march that came to be called the Trail of Tears. During the 1,200-mile journey, 1 in 4 perished due to exposure, exhaustion, and starvation.